Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today's review is Kenji Kamiyame's new movie, Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim. Set 183 years before the events of Fellowship of the Rings, the film follows Helm Hammerhead, voiced by Brian Cox, as the King of Rohan, who attempts to defend his own people from Wolf, who is the ruthless leader and warlord of Lendings, who is taking revenge after the death of his father. While in the midst of it, Hera, voiced by Gerard Wise, who is the daughter of Helm. And of course, after some stuff goes down really significantly and the war becomes more and more inevitable, she must lead her people into war against Wolf. And before you ask, yes, I'm going down with a slight cold, which I will cough occasionally, and yes, I sound a lot deeper than usual, but it's just because I had a cold recently, so I just want to do a review, so the cold's a little bit more out of the way, more approachable more doable while doing a review. But of course, I do sound a bit like Tom Waits, but yeah, but anyways, let's get back to the review. Lord of the Rings, without any matter of doubt, is considered one of the greatest literatures ever made, but one of the greatest movies ever made by Peter Jackson. The New Zealander pretty much revolutionised cinema for the 21st century with not just one, but two, but three movies, starting with Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, then Return of the King, a film that's so monumental that became one of the few films around that point that made $1 billion in the box office, and even bigger, it won 11 Oscars, a film that only Titanic and Ben-Hur has ever done. Of course, the image and its reputation of Lord of the Rings was pretty much immortal at that point. Then we fast forward nearly a decade later with the Hobbit trilogy. Even though it did boast some really big receipts in the box office, but the film's critical tone was far different from Lord of the Rings, where the first trilogy had a rapturous acclaim from every turn. The critic reception for Hobbit seemed just dwindled down a little bit for each new film, which undoubtedly what became a problem for Peter Jackson, as the only major-ish film he worked on is Mortal Engines and some documentaries about World War One and the Beatles. And of course, knowing this is Lord of the Rings, the appeal of it pretty much certainly did grow after Hobbit, with the Amazon Prime series, which has got some attention, and of course, the new anime film from the same guy who did Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, with Individual 11, The Laughing Man, that stuff. He's relatively not the household name of anime like Hayao Miyazaki, but he's still a well-known and pretty respected figure in the anime industry. However, of course, the production did have a bit of a snag as well, because New Line Cinema did announce this movie, and they were fast-tracking this movie so they don't lose the adaptation rights from all of J.R.R. Tolkien's books, because there's a Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, there's also this huge proxy battle, which is this film is involved in with Amazon Prime about who owns Lord of the Rings. Again, this does make for some very interesting stuff, particularly that New Line Cinema is now owned by Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers doesn't really care about animation, or the owner, being David Slasov, gives the impression he doesn't, as in he pretty much threw the Coyote movie crew under the bus when it's shelved, and the day the Earth blew up, the Looney Tunes movie seems like it's a poorly advertised movie waiting to happen, even though I'm not sure what the reception is going to be like, but given us some complaints, given how badly advertised this movie is at the moment, given it did really meager numbers in the box office in US and Canada, 4.6 million off a $30 million budget. That's based on Canadian and American numbers, which is again very anemic considering Lord of the Rings numbers. Right off the bat, the animation is absolutely amazing in this movie. Yes, it's anime, and anime by default most of the time is absolutely amazing, and knowing it has the backing of Lord of the Rings behind it, and how it uses that world and utilizes it, in my opinion, it's absolutely incredible, the animation. Particularly there's one scene where Hera's riding through the forest with a horse while being chased down by this incredibly large demented elephant that got sucked into the river with that big snake animal. again, that animation where the camera just shifts around the horse and shifts around the environment, shifts around Hera, and how frantic and very claustrophobic the camera is towards her and the horse as well. Which does show how brilliant the camera movement, particularly in the animation in this movie, is in my opinion. Like, the animation is brilliant. And Wolf, in this movie, the main antagonist, is a very compelling villain in my opinion. Like, even though his motivation is that he lost his father in the hands of Helm after a really nasty brawl that happened earlier in the movie, and now he's essentially a ruthless leader of Dungelendings, and also a huge warlord who would stop at nothing and in his mad quest to conquer all the kingdoms of Rohan, no matter how many obstacles he has to overcome, even if it's his childhood friend being Hera in this movie, who is also a childhood friend of his. Like, he is also a pretty great villain. Like, the voice acting of Luke Pasqualano, if I pronounced his surname correctly, like, he does a great voice acting work in this movie, and as well how really stoic and very intimidating, and almost how towering he is as a villain. It's definitely something I do applaud out of him. And there's Helm, Hammerhead, who's voiced by Brian Cox, and there's the Hera, being voiced by Gia Wise, who are both really great characters in my opinion. Even though I think Helm by Brian Cox is a more of a compelling character in my opinion, as basically as this hot-tempered king of Rohan, who wants to protect the people of Rohan, regardless how many obstacles he does face in the movie. And so much so, there's even this massive segment of there's this small segment in this movie where he escapes his own kingdom after he and his people are thrown into exile, and he does so by fighting a massive beast. Like, I feel like at this point the movie does come to life in my opinion. And then this is where it comes into a slight problem when I said the film does come into life. As much as I like Hera as the main character in this movie, but I feel like Helm is more of a bespoken character, more of a stronger character than Hera, because I feel like Hera just doesn't come off as too interesting in my opinion. Like, I feel like she's basically the note is that she's a badass. She's the daughter of a king, and she rides horses. Like, I feel like Gia Wise was given so little to work with the character that I think she's essentially treated as some sort of a Studio Ghibli character, particularly something like Nazca or Valley of the Wind. Like how that movie took very heavy influence, not just on its art style, but also the main characters being very out and about daughters who are daughters of like ruling figureheads of the country, and in the midst of a really brutal war. I feel like they just somewhat copy Nazca's Valley Wind's main character, just inserted into there, with only tweaking one or two things. And the writing in this movie was not that great, in my opinion. Even though, yes, the original trilogy does boast some incredible screenplays being taken off the pages of J.R.R. Tolkien's original novels, but I feel like there comes a point where you're strayed so far from the J.R.R. Tolkien's books that it kind of did its own thing. And it does show a little bit, even though it does go in the movie is based on the apparatus and details of world building in the said trilogy, since the books are well known for their very intense world building. But I feel like I'm not sure if this is translation issues from its American writers to its Japanese crew, or it had one too many studio notes, but the writing itself just felt very stiff, and the dialogue just felt like it just suffered as a result of either studio interference or just communication between the American writers and the Japanese crew. The movie is, of course, visually interesting, and the character work is hit or miss, but I wonder if the movie, it does get a director's cut, or an extended cut, like the Lord of the Rings and a Hobbit film, since P. Jackson has made it very clear that this is like the bare bones of what you get of these movies, considering how large and sprawling the novels can get. But I imagine if Rohirrim would get that same treatment, as in get an extended cut when it comes to streaming, or maybe DVD, Blu-ray, or 4K. Because again, I feel like a lot of the details, like the writing, and feel like how very underwhelming the main character is, Hera. I wonder if they would flesh her out and expand her character depth in this movie, or maybe fix some of the writing again in the extended cut to make it a somewhat more of a salvageable project. But again, I'm not going to be the most far down on this movie. The one thing that definitely does salvage this movie to a massive degree, the movie does come alight, particularly in the second half, with a lot more action scenes, and the action scenes in that movie are incredible. Even though I'm not sure how they would measure up to the Lord of the Rings movie, since I've seen them like so long ago at this point, but I feel like the action scenes, particularly of Hera and Wolf, in the final action scene, is absolutely brilliant. And when Helm fights off these massive beasts who are looking for human flesh, which is also a really good scene. I feel like the second one, the first half of this movie feels bizarrely very slow paced, sluggish, and very pedestrian, even for Lord of the Rings standards. Like this feels a bit, the pacing issues feels a lot slower and a bit more mundane, but the movie does feel a lot more of a Lord of the Rings movie, particularly how the action scenes and how the world building really does come back into life, and how how Rohan gets invaded by Wolf's forces, and how that all went down, and how the strategy of Helm seems to, how Helm or Brian Cox's character seemed to almost backfire on him a little bit, but again, this is like really interesting stuff, and how it got more and more character depth, particularly in these battle scenes. Despite some interesting characters here and there, and some very cool animation, I feel like the film somewhat fell apart, or just wasn't for me in this instance. The dialogue was at best very flimsy for most of the film. The film, it feels bizarrely pedestrian for the first half of the movie, then really kicks into form with the second half of the movie. The action scenes are incredible in my opinion, but I feel like the main character just lacked that little spark that just made her a lot more of a memorable hero. As opposed to something like in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Hobbit trilogy, or something like that. But I feel like this is definitely Lord of the Rings' more weaker stuff that came out, particularly with Peter Jackson's involvement, since he is involved in this movie as an executive producer. But I feel like it isn't up there with the original trilogy. It's more down there. Let's say Battle of Five Armies, where the entire the entire movie was essentially just the one long action scene. At least this one was cohesive enough where it isn't the one big action scene in the movie. But I feel like at the end this is more of a deep cut that I feel like more hardened Lord of the Rings fans are going to be way more into the future. But I imagine it may improve with a director's cut or an extended cut if it does come out. But I feel like this is not the best first impression that the Return to Middle Earth with Peter Jackson's involvement in. Not exactly a best first impression. So I'm feeling a 6 out of 10 on this one. So, what do you think of the new Lord of the Rings War of Rohirrim? Like this video and comment down below, subscribe to my channel, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd and Blue Sky and Threads, and dislike rolls, and bye!